Welcome everyone to another edition of Ozarks Voices Oral History Project of the Missouri State University Libraries. My name is Tom Peters. Today is October 26, 2021, and we are visiting today with Leon Combs in his home in Taney County. Leon, thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom. Nice being here and talk about my past, which old guys always like to do. Our kids and grandkids are not interested.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Route 66, right?
Right. Let's talk about Route 66 and just your experiences traveling along the Mother Road. So, you came to the Ozarks when you were very young, correct?
I was born in Forsyth 86 years ago.
Okay.
So, yes, I was born and raised right here.
So you're an Ozarker.
Absolutely.
All right.
Real, yeah.
86 years, and you spent most of your life.
I did. I was in St. Louis about 35 years in my business career. That's where I had my businesses. And I sold those and came back here about 1994. So I've been retired for 25 or 26 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Been retired longer than I worked. But I came back home. This is where I came from originally.
Yeah.
I went to Bradleyville High School, 5 miles from here.
Yep.
And graduated in 1953.
53. Okay. And when were I saw this on the sign coming into town. State champs 62, 67, 68?
You got it. Those are the 3 years, yes.
Yeah. And you wrote a book called The Hicks from the Sticks,
yes,
about those mythical teams.
Yeah, Bradleyville basketball, the Hicks from the Sticks. I did that because when I went to Bradleyville School in the 50s, graduating in 53, we had no gymnasium until my senior year. So we loved to play basketball, but we played on outdoor courts in the mud and the rain and the cold and the snow. And so when we played games, we just lost unmercifully. In fact, Branson beat us one time 64-6. I played on that team. And for the 4 years I played basketball, we lost every game except 2. We won 2 games. But then the reason I wrote the book was I was fast forward many years, and I was at the University of Missouri in Columbia, having served in the Marine Corps, and I've been back now. And I reading a newspaper about Bradleyville winning some games, and I think, man, that's unusual. They won games, and each day I'd check the paper, and they were winning games. And then I had a brother on that team. He was a center, and long story short, they came to Columbia in 1962 and won the state championship, which was just unbelievable to me.
Which was the entire state championship.
Well, no, at that time
they still had the classes.
It was three class, small, medium, large. So they were a small school. But
they won the small school state championship.
It was a small school state championship, but they were beating all the big schools down here because the blue and gold tournament in Springfield.
Right.
That brings in everybody, the big schools and small schools, and Bradleyville was winning that.
Wow.
And so they were beating Parkview and Hillcrest and all the Springfield schools. They had 75 students in school. Wow. So anyhow, that happened, and then I was kind of forgotten about. And then many years later, when I retired in I think about 1996, I was talking to my brother Joe, and I said, I went to journalism school at Mizzou, but then I got into business. And I never did write anything. I've always kind of wanted to write something. He said, well, why don't you write a story about the Bradleyville basketball team? And hey, that's a good idea. Because in the meanwhile, the kids in school then, in the 90s, hardly knew about this.
Right.
Because, that happened ancient times to them. The trophies had been thrown down in the basement. There were no trophy cases. No one knew about it. So I started retrieving that. And long story short, went around the state interviewing the teams where Bradleyville played, the coaches, the old players, and wrote Bradleyville basketball, the Hicks from the Sticks.
Yeah.
And where that name came from was they were going, and this is 1966, Bradleyville was going to play that night in Springfield against Parkview. Parkview was the Jolly Green Giants. They were undefeated. Bradleyville was undefeated. And they were talking about it on KWTO radio. And the coach heard this, and then they were talking about the game tonight. And someone called in and said, well, you know, Bradleyville could do pretty well down there in the boondocks, those little country schools. But he said the Hicks and the Sticks are going to meet their match tonight. Well, they met their match. They beat Parkview handily.
Really?
And anyhow, that's where the title of the book came
The
from.
Hitch and the Sticks.
Yeah.
You know, some teams are just talented. I mean, they just have a lot of natural athletes, whatever you want to say. Other teams achieve success, it seems to me. This is Tom's theory
Yeah.
of sports in a nutshell. Other teams are really good as teams. They're teammates. They might be talented, but they don't have, you know, the Shaquille O'Neal kind of player,
Yeah.
you know. But they play well as a team. They know what each other. They almost like they know what their teammates are going to do. You know, so you can do backdoor passes and that kind of stuff. And they play well as a team. How would you describe the Bradleyville Wonder teams? Were they just naturally talented?
No, it was kind of like a perfect storm, and it happened that maybe 7 or 8 years had great winning records and great teams, and never again since then. But they had a few really great players. David Combs was one. Darrell Paul was famous. But then they had, in each case, they had a brand new coach. The first year, Arjo Ellison. First year was Ray Gibson and his brother Omar Gibson. They're from Blue Eye. And so Bradleyville needed a superintendent and a coach. So Bert Horner went to Blue Eye and talked to Omar and Ray, and he hired them as Omar as superintendent and Ray as coach. And Omar got $6,000 and Ray got $4,000. They got a package deal for $10,000. Ray won the state championship that year.
The first year as the first year coach.
First year coach.
Wow.
And anyhow, they just had some great players. They had Darrell Paul, David Combs, Lonnie Combs. My brother Joe Combs was really good, and they had these great coaches, and they did play well because they had all played together since grade school. I mean, they knew that they could just look at each other and know what was going to happen. So That worked really well. They had some great teams, and they still we had once I wrote the book, I got everybody together. This is in 99, I guess.
Yeah.
And Missouri Sports Hall of Fame had me there to interview the players. I called all the players, and they had a basketball luncheon, and I took all the players to luncheon. They were recognized, and that evening, I was interviewed at the game by KY3, Channel 10, Channel 33. And I had all the guys and the coaches here at the house that afternoon and evening. We barbecued, had dinner. And someone said, "Hey, Leon, come in here, look." On TV, I was on all 3 channels at once talking about this book. So needless to say, the book was selling like hotcakes. Amazon could, at this time, Barnes & Noble couldn't keep it in stock. We kept ordering it from the publisher, but it went really well. So that's kind of a high point of my retired life, because it was coming afterthought after I'd retired.
Just because you wanted to do something,
Yeah.
why don't you write about the Bradleyville basketball team?
But after I got out of high school, before I got out of high school, I started going out west to work, and we'd hitchhike out west. And I
So
think
you graduated in 53 from high school?
graduated in '53,
Okay.
but I
And
went
how
out
big was
west.
your class?
I'm sorry,
How big was your graduation?
8 seniors.
8.
8 seniors, yeah, that's one of the smaller classes, although there was a few years before that with 2 seniors, so we weren't the smallest class. There were 4 boys and 4 girls. And so my junior year, after my junior year, Bill Blair, Russell Selvage and I went out west. And that's a different story, and we took a Greyhound bus, and the Greyhound drivers went on strike. And so we weren't on Highway 66 because we were going to the state of Washington.
Yeah.
But we were all over the West, and we were in Salina, Kansas. We left Kansas City, and I'd never been in a big bus station like that. But in 1952, the Kansas City Greyhound station was a gigantic place, like a big airport now. Because airports are not a big deal, because not many people were flying.
Right.
But they had an escalator. I never seen an escalator. And they had a black and white TV in a bar. And people were gathered around
In
looking at that
1952.
TV. They had a boxing match on it. And
Yeah.
someone said, "You know, them guys is fighting right now. This is real live TV.
Yeah.
So we never seen that. But anyhow, got on a bus and rode through Kansas. Woke up the next morning. We're in Salina, Kansas. Went in there and the bus drivers went on strike. We were stranded. And so the story is, I won't go into that long story, but they transferred us to Trailways, and Trailways took us to Butte, Montana, put us on a train. Train took us somewhere. We ended up in Yakima, Washington, eventually. But
were you there to pick fruit, or what was
we were out
what
there
took
to work in the wheat. I worked in a pea harvest, and wheat harvest. I drove a truck in pea harvest and wheat harvest, and in those horseshoe mountains out there during the wheat harvest, the mountains were just like this. And so when we'd go around the mountains, when the big combines would be pulled by caterpillars, you know, and they had chains on them, and they had levelers. The left wheel would be here, and the right wheel would be 10 feet long. They'd have a jack on it, you know. And so when the trucks would have to load, they would offload while they were moving. So we'd have to hook a truck by a log chain and go around there, and they were unloading us. Then they'd unhook the log chain, and we'd go down the mountain.
Wow.
So, but anyhow, that's another story.
So you're making, it was good money when you're just fresh out of high school.
$15 a day plus room and board.
Wow.
7 days a week.
And then
$105 a week in 1952 for a 17-year-old boy. I was 17.
Yeah.
That was big money. No taxes withheld because it's
Yeah.
farm work. And on that part of the world, I went out there between my junior and senior year in high school, after my senior year in high school, before my first year at SMS in Springfield, and then after my first year at SMS. And
you did that. You went out and worked.
Went out
harvest.
three times, and mainly in pea harvest and wheat harvest.
Yeah.
And the third year I went out, I'd saved $600 working, and I had it saved, and I was going to get a Greyhound bus ticket back home. And I was in Walla Walla, Washington, and I put my suitcase in one of those lockers in a bus station, and went across the street to a saloon over there. There's a bar, and I thought, I'll see if they'll serve me a beer, because I was not old enough. So I went in there. Sure enough, they served me, and there's no guy sitting next to me. And he said, "You like to play poker?" I said, "Oh yeah, we play poker in the bunkhouse all the time." He said, "We got a little game back here in the back room if you want to join." I said, "Okay," So I went back there, and it was a little round table of 4 or 5 guys around there. I had these visors on, a single light bulb hanging down, and they said, "Come on, Sonny, join us." So they pulled up a chair, and a fifth of Jack Daniels, said, "Help yourself." I mean, everybody just drinking out of the bottle. So I helped myself, pull my money out of my shoe, put it on the table, and 3 or 4 hours later, I left there drunk and broke. Took all my money, gave me all
of your savings?
all my savings, all I saved to come back to school.
Right.
And so that was the end of my school for the time being. So I just left there hitchhiking. Didn't know where I was going.
Yeah.
And a cop stopped me in Pendleton, Oregon, and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going, I don't know, I'm going somewhere." He said, "I could arrest you for being a vagrant." I said, "Why don't you do that? Because I'm looking for a place to sleep." He said, "No, go."
I need a good meal.
Yeah, truck driver picked me up, a logging truck picked me up. And we went, and I went to sleep right away. And pretty soon he was saying, "Hey, buddy, you gotta get out of here. I'm turning off to go up to logging camp."
Yeah.
So I got my suitcase, got out, and it was early morning. I climbed the fence, went over there under a tree. I opened my suitcase up, just threw all my dirty clothes out, and laid down on it, and I slept all day long. And then I got up that evening. I was sitting there against a tree, smoking a cigarette, which we all did in those days.
Yeah.
And then I remembered I had a friend in Klamath Falls, Oregon, that worked on the railroad, Don Thurman from Bradleyville. So I hitchhiked to Klamath Falls, got a job on the railroad, worked for a while, and then joined the Marine Corps.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but you did attend SMS for a while before Mizzou?
I did. I was SMS and I belonged to Sigma Pi fraternity, and I've got that Ozarks yearbook in there to prove it. I was in a play at SMS.
Really? What
called
play do you remember?
The Detective Story. And David Melton. I've been thinking I should go into the yearbook and look at some of these guys and see. David Melton was the editor, and he and I were in the play. And I was in ROTC, and I went out for basketball, but I wasn't good enough. But Eddie Matthews was a coach then. He was a famous coach, Eddie Matthews. And every day you'd go in and he'd have a list of all the players. And as long as your name was there, you could still practice and walk on. And so I went in there one day, my name wasn't there, which didn't really surprise me because I would. So
it had been on there.
It had been on there every day.
And one day you come in and it's not there.
When it's not there. And I started to walk out, downcast, of course. He said, "Hey, Leon, come here." It was the old McDonald Gymnasium.
Right.
He called me down there. He had a little cubbyhole office. And he said, "I want to talk to you." So and he said, "I hated to cut you." He said, "I've never had anybody that worked harder and tried harder than you." And he said, "I just want to tell you that if you continue to put forth this kind of effort in your rest of your life, you won't have anything to worry about. You're going to do great." So he cut me and kind of made me feel good about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, he was right.
He was a great guy. And his son is Edsel Matthews, and he was a wonderful man. He died suddenly, not long after of a heart attack.
So you joined the Marines.
Yeah.
Where'd you get your basic training?
San Diego. I had boot camp in San Diego, and I went to then I went to Oceanside to Camp Pendleton for combat training. Did all the combat. All Marines had to go through combat training, and then they wanted me to fly jets, and I wanted to fly jets because I passed a 2-year college equivalency. I had 1 year, and everything except I could never pass the colorblind test. They kept calling me back 2 or 3 times. I even tried to bribe.
Colorblind was.
I was colorblind, red, green, blue.
Was
And I tried to bribe a corpsman. I said, "Hey man, pass me. I'll give you $10." They said, "I can't do that. I'll get in trouble." But anyhow, I did that. So I served my time in the Marine Corps. But that's when I hitchhiked back and forth on Route 66.
So you're in Southern California as a Marine, and you get a pass to go home.
Yep.
So what do you do?
I get a pass to go home, and most of the time I would hitchhike. But this one time, which happened to be in February of 1956, I got a Trailways bus ticket, and I got it on, and it was to Springfield, Missouri, because when you get to Springfield, from there on you just have to find your way to Bradleyville. But
there's no bus to Bradleyville.
No buses, no. But I didn't know that going across Texas, you'd get into a winter storm. I thought Texas was a southern state. We got in the damnedest snowstorm. I mean, cars were off beside the road. The bus driver was having a more and more difficult time. I was sitting right behind the bus driver, like on a front row seat. And it was getting really hazardous because in those days, Highway 66 was just a 2-lane highway.
Yeah.
That was long before the interstates.
Yeah.
And we saw cars off, big trucks in a ditch. Jackknifed, and cars in a ditch, and no snow plows around. It just kept pouring down snow. We finally got to a little town and couldn't go any further. He said, "Folks, we can't go any further. The roads were blocked both ways, in and out. The highway patrol or whatever it was, it just stopped all traffic. You really didn't need the highway patrol because it was stopped on its own.
Yeah.
The weather stopped it.
It was impossible to go.
And we stopped there, and to me, again, I was a teenager. It was a lot of fun to me. I was enjoying this. I was in no hurry. In fact, there was a girl on the bus named Betty Wilder, and Betty and I hit it off. And then,
did you know Betty before you got on the bus?
No, I never met her before. I met her on the
friendship?
bus. And then that night, I don't know how many nights we were there, 2 or 3 nights in that little town of Vega, Texas.
Yeah.
And
which is in the Panhandle. So you're going across Route 66.
Yeah.
Like from Albuquerque.
Albuquerque to Amarillo. I was in between.
Right.
Albuquerque and Amarillo.
Santa Rosa, Tucumcari.
Yeah. All those are familiar.
And on, you were headed to Springfield.
Headed to Springfield.
But you got into the Texas Panhandle, and the storm was so bad.
Vicious storm and
blowing. Was it blowing too?
Blowing. It's blowing and cold and blowing. Yeah. And but the storm, we read later that little town had 61 inches of snow, and it all fell like in 2 days.
Which, as far as I can tell, is the highest recorded snowfall ever in Texas.
It happened to be when I was there.
5 feet of snow.
So they put us up one night. I don't know if it was the first night or second night. They took us to the courthouse, and I mean, when I say us, I mean the people on the bus and all the people. There were people in cars
Right.
and I guess other buses. The town was full of people stranded.
There was a total of 2 restaurants in town?
2 restaurants. I went to one restaurant the second day, and the place was just jammed. And I ordered a hamburger, and the girl says, "Sonny, this is the last hamburger. We were out of food after this." So the town ran out of food. The cafe had no food left. The other cafe had no food. The grocery store, people were raiding the grocery store, buying bologna and bread to make sandwiches. They were out of food.
People panic, as we found out during the pandemic.
They panicked, and they were
stock up. And
they were stranded. They were cold. They were hungry, and there was no place to get anything to eat. And I don't know who engineered this. It must have been the town fathers, but the farmers in the area all got together and brought food into town. They brought beef and pork and chicken. They brought canned foods, or they canned all their vegetables, and they brought them into the to the school cafeteria. I don't know whether it was a high school or elementary school, but I remember it had a nice cafeteria, and man, was it used, because people just started flocking in there. The word was out, there's food at the school cafeteria. And these women and wives were serving food, just like this. It reminded me of being back in the Marine Corps. You just go down the line, they were dished it out to you. So then I slept on the floor. I slept with a woman that night. Betty Wilder and I slept on the floor, but we were with 300 other people, you know. So it was sleepy.
Yeah.
And I don't think we slept at all because we were having too much fun. Just allow this to the older people, I'm sure it's extremely stressful. But to the teenagers, it was just an experience.
it was just great fun.
Yeah, so we were there for 2 or 3 days, and then finally got out there. And as far as that, from that on, I don't even remember. Think about this. This was 65 years ago. 65 years ago. So you don't remember a lot of details,
Yeah.
but I do remember that. And then later on, I talked to someone who had read about this in the Reader's Digest. They said they read a story of the greatest experience I ever had, or something like that. So I did that. Another time I was on Route 66 coming back from Los Angeles, and I got stranded somewhere out in New Mexico or Texas or somewhere, and a trucker, the 18-wheeler, stopped and picked me up. And he didn't pick me up first. He pulled over and he said, hey, can you drive a truck? I said, that's what I've been doing all summer. He said, well, get in here, I want to talk to you. He said, my relief driver couldn't make it, and I've been driving all the way from LA. I've got to get this load to St. Louis. And he said, I need to get it in there tomorrow morning or sometime soon. He said, if you could drive this thing. I said, I can drive it. And he said, well, let me see if you can. So he showed me the gears, had like 9 forward gears. And he sat up there with me. He said, well, let's go. We got it back on the road. And I could drive pretty well. I'd been driving trucks and wheat haulers, but they weren't 18-wheelers.
They were strict.
So we got cruising down the road. He said, hey, you're fine, man. He said, I'm going to take a nap. So he crawled back in a sleeper back behind, and he crawled back up there and went to sleep. I drove that rig for 3 or 4 hours until he finally woke up, and he said, hey, let's stop somewhere and get him something to eat. So we found a truck stop, went in there. He bought me something to eat, and he took me into Springfield, dropped me off, and that was another experience.
I suppose it's too late to make a citizen's arrest that you were driving a truck with
I didn't have a CDL
a
license.
CDL license, that's right. And ironically, you went on to operate a truck driving school.
And it was one of the first schools in the country to issue CDL driver's license, to train people for it. And John Danforth helped us do that because I was in St. Louis, my school was, and he was writing the law of the CDL.
Yeah.
And he came down to my school and talked to our instructors, but that's another story.
Yeah. So, was serving in the Marines in Southern California, was that kind of a culture shock for you, coming from Bradleyville to, but you'd been to the Northwest and you'd traveled.
No, I had been 3 times to the Northwest hitchhiking, and the Marine Corps to me was really a piece of cake, because I've been working here. My dad owned a feed store, and I'd carry a 100-pound sack of feed under each arm when I was 18 years old, you know, I was accustomed to getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and milking cows and chopping. So the Marine Corps was easy for me as far as physical things. I was in good shape, and mentally, I mean, I could take commands. I mean, I was used to, my father gave me commands. He was my drill instructor. I was used to being told, do that and do it now. Okay, yes sir, get it done. So to me, but so many of the guys, I got more in trouble and more trouble in the boot camp, laughing. They asked, and realized, hey Combs, you think that's so damn funny, you know? And he'd kick me and, oh, I'm sorry, but I mean, seeing the other guys, they just couldn't take it. They'd cry, and some of them, and I couldn't understand at that time. They'd call their mother, and I had been, I guess, away from home enough that I just couldn't believe these Marines have to go call their mother. Yeah. But yeah, the Marine Corps was easy. And then another trip back, this is on the way out. I was in Springfield, and I was at the Pine Room. It was a bar on the west side of the square. And I used to drink in there with Moose Amlack, Don Amlack. But I remember being in there, and I was going west, and I think this is some of the time when I went out west, I would hitchhike 66, then get to LA, and then go up through California to Oregon and Washington. So this was I think this is when I was finished my first year at SMS. It'd been 1954, before I joined the Marine Corps. And I was having a beer with Don Amlack, the big 6'10" center who was All-American, and they won the national championship that year. We were drinking beer, and I told him I was heading out, so he took me out to Route 66, dropped me off. Now, was 66, what road was it going through town, Springfield?
It was College, west of the square, and then I'd get out to Chestnut and go Chestnut, due west.
Did 66 go right through the square?
Yes.
Okay, that's
well, probably. It changed its alignment. I don't know by 53. It might have been going down Kearney Street.
66, in most cases, 66 went right through the downtown. I mean, right through Indianapolis, right through St. Louis, right through I mean, that was the purpose of it, right? To bring the people through the city, which upset them when they built the interstate.
Then we got that bypass mentality.
I was in the Pine Room, which I think was on 66. Probably. I believe that because that was the west exit from the square. And I remember being in there before I headed west. And I was somewhere around, I got to like Tulsa. And a guy picked me up in a little tiny car. I'd never seen a car like this. It was a Austin Healey, you know, and a room for just two people in there. You know, and there was no back seat or anything. Right. And he picked me up, and he said he was going to Oklahoma City, which is not very far. I said, okay, fine. So in those days, I don't think I had hardly any luggage at all. You know, when you're you don't need a lot of stuff to drag around with you. But whatever I had, he threw it in his car. And so we went along. Then when we got to Oklahoma City, he said, well, no, I'm going to go a little further. So you can go a little further with me. And he said, but now if you're going to ride further with me, you're going to have to chip in for the gas, help me with the gas. So I went into my shoe. I had a little money saved. So gas was probably 25 or 30 cents a gallon. Right. And the Austin Healey. So it was a pretty easy task. But then he told me once he got to like me and saw I was going to share in the gas, he said, really, I'm going to Los Angeles. I didn't want to tell you that at first, so I thought I might not like you. Yeah. But he said, I like you. So he was thinking like you. He like this guy. And so and then what I remember most about that was he was too cheap to get a motel. And you couldn't sleep in that car. And he wouldn't let me drive. And so we were somewhere out in the desert. He said, we're going to spend the night right here. And he pulled the car off the road, just out on the sand. And he had a sleeping bag. And he had a couple of blankets or quilts for me. So he crawled in his sleeping bag and just gave me the quilts. And I thought it was going to be okay because it had been hot all that day. It was June. I froze my butt off that night. I mean, it must have been 30 degrees out there. I almost froze. I don't think I slept a week. I'm so glad to get in that little car the next day.
Well, I can empathize because just in the last 10 years, I had to go out to Phoenix to pick up a gift. And I took a panel van, because it was going to be more than I could fit in, like, you know, an SUV or something.
Yeah.
So I had a panel van, and I was just, you know, I'm a cheapskate, so I'm like, well, you know, I'll just take, I've got a air mattress, and I'll just sleep in the back of this panel van as I'm driving out there. And it was a hot day, it was up into 90
Yeah.
degrees or so, but you get up, you know, there's certain areas in Route 66 where you get above 7,000 feet, you know. And I was out there.
Flagstaff, somewhere maybe.
Yeah, but even like when you get to the Continental Divide there,
Yeah.
in before you get into Gallup, and so it got to be late, and I was tired, been driving all day, and so I just pulled into a truck stop and thought, well, I'll just, you know, curl up here and I'll be good. The thing I didn't know, living, you know, in the lower altitudes, is it could be 90 degrees during the day, but it cools off.
That's
very
exactly what I
quickly
learned.
in the high mountain area.
Yep.
And I was freezing by, you know, 3 a.m., waking up, freezing, you know, and I think I finally got bad, just, I'm not going to sleep now, I'll get on the road, you know, but it gets cool at night when you get above 7,000.
Oh,
It
yeah.
doesn't matter where you are.
We had another trip. Now this was after I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to the University of Missouri, enrolled in a journalism school, and got married right away. I met a girl when I was in the Marine Corps in the Hollywood USO. She was a hostess there. She had a lot of young ladies that play ping pong with you, and they had free donuts and coffee, so that's where we'd hang out at Hollywood USO.
Yeah.
So she came back and we got married and had a baby, and so in 1960, now Route 66 I think was still functioning in 1960.
It was decommissioned, I should know this, I think 68?
Yeah.
I forget when it was decommissioned, but
So I had got a job at the University of Missouri. I drove a cab at night and I was selling pots and pans, door to door.
pots and pans.
Pots and pans. In those days it was called hope chest items. Young girls,
Yeah.
they would have hope chests because they put their things when they're going to get married,
Yeah.
their silverware and their dishes and so forth. So we sold that stuff, and I was good. I became the campus manager, but I made enough money to buy a new 1960 Ford Falcon. That was the first year they came out.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated in January '60. I started there in '57. I went straight through summer, intersessions, everything
You always
to get down. And I got out in January of '60, and that summer, my wife and I took my 18-month-old son, and we drove Route 66 to California to see her mother and dad, to visit them.
Mm.
And that was a really hot trip. I remember the Mojave Desert was so bad, and I remember seeing those big Cadillacs and things go by me with the windows up, and you knew they had air conditioning, which of course we didn't have.
Right.
And it got so hot that in my back seat that my wife put wet diapers. In those days, they were real diapers. They weren't paper diapers.
Right.
And she hung it up on the window. She wet it in the gas station
Right.
and hang it up on the window to keep it off the baby.
Yeah.
So we went to and visited her mother and dad. And on the way back, I remember we stopped at Amarillo, Texas, because I think I had $25 left. And I said, and we lived in Columbia at that time. I said, honey, let's stop and get us a motel, get us a nice dinner, and then we'll go on home tomorrow. Okay, good idea. Because imagine, get a motel, then a steak dinner for two, and
For
a
less
child for $25.
Less than $25.
Yes. So we stopped. It was a Howard Johnson. Stopped at Howard Johnson's. They had a motel back behind, and
And the restaurant.
The
And
restaurant.
back then, Hojo was
and they had 28 flavors of ice cream.
it was a good restaurant. Yeah.
So we got into a restaurant, and Brett, who is now 62 years old, was 18 months old, and he was in a rotten mood. He'd been back in the motel. He was ramming his little toys into the wall, so we took him up there, set a table. So we ordered our food and ordered him a glass of milk. And as soon as he got that milk, he just knocked it off the table, splashed it all on the floor. And I told him, I said, why don't you take him back to the motel, and I'll get our food to go, and I'll bring it back there. So I got our food to go back there. He ruined our $25 evening. I've told him that several times now.
You probably owed her a lot of date nights after that. Hitchhiking on 66, I think it's hard for people today. Well, I'll ask it as a question. I mean, did you ever feel in a unsafe situation when you were hitchhiking?
No, I never did, but there was a period there in the 50s, I can't remember exactly when it was, I think it was 58, when Starkweather, a guy named Starkweather, killed a whole family of people.
He was a hitchhiker?
He was a hitchhiker in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I think it was on Route 66. You could probably Google that word Starkweather and get the story, but that panicked everybody. Because he was a hitchhiker, they picked him up and he killed the whole family.
Yeah.
Mother, father, children. And,
took the car or whatever. And
yeah, and of course that spooked people. But when I was in the Marine Corps, I found out early on that if I put on a uniform, I got picked up right away. In those days, in the 50s, you know, the military guys were honored, not like the Vietnam days,
right.
where they would spit at you probably if you
right.
drove
but
by.
you were
yeah.
America's finest.
Yes, in those days, I mean, when you go into a bar, they'd buy you drinks, you know,
right.
just you had your uniform on.
Right.
So to answer your question, no, I never was concerned, and I do remember another situation. I'd forgotten about this, but I went into a little town somewhere, and I went to a bus station. Every little town had a bus station, and I said, if I get a ticket on this bus, how much would it cost me to buy a ticket to daylight, to where it, because it was nighttime.
Oh,
if I get a ticket here to, now how far would it take me, and how much will it cost you to get a ticket to daylight? I said, well, let's see, you know, you'll get to about here, and it should be daylight, and that's $8. I said, okay, I'm gonna give me that ticket.
So you would buy a ticket to daylight?
I buy a ticket to daylight. And
well,
that's
that sounds like, you know, that could be a country song.
Yeah, and you get on that bus, I had a big old comfortable seat. And when I'd be asleep in 2 minutes, you know,
yeah.
sound asleep.
Yeah.
I'd sleep 4 or 5 hours or whatever it was, and I'm ready to go now, dude.
And somebody would rouse check when it started to get daylight and say, well, you know, this is the end of the line.
Yeah. And they didn't want to. People didn't want to pick you up at nighttime. That was even good time. That was always spooky. And if you didn't have enough money for motels and things, and so that was my answer: just go into a local bus station and buy a ticket to daylight. I did it more than once.
And basically, that would be your sleeping accommodation.
Oh yeah, that was my motel.
Yeah.
And I was moving.
Back in the day, could you sort of, how far back could you lean back? Could you get?
It was very comfortable. I remember.
Yeah.
I remember. And the first time, this is when Bill Blair and Russell Selvage and I went out the first time, we got on, that's the time when they were on a strike, we were on the back seat of a Greyhound bus. The big seat went all the way across the back. The one seat in the back went all the way across. And so there was a girl, now this wasn't Betty Wilder, this was another girl. And she came back and she was laughing because we were younger, and she was probably 2 or 3 years older than we were. She was cute, and she said, why don't we play cards? So we said, okay, we'll play cards. So she, I'll deal. So we were sitting in the back seat, you know, I was here, Russell was here, and Bill was here. So she would shuffle the card, and she'd deal the card, and she'd put them in your lap and press them down. Or the guys would just wiggle and squirm, and she would just laugh her butt off. And she stayed with us all the way up through, and Butte, Montana, we had to get a motel. And because we got stranded there at night. And so we pooled our money, and it was Russell, Bill, and I, and we went to an old motel, and we got a hotel for like $4 a night. And the woman said, that girl is not going to stay with you. And I said, she's not going to stay with us. Well, she was, because she didn't have any place to stay. Yeah. So she stayed with us, and I wrote a story about that. Because Bill he was horning in on her big time. And she wouldn't have anything to do with him. She was picking on Russell, and Russell was backstory. He didn't want anything to do with her. And so it was quite a story.
That sounds like quite a situation you found yourself in. I thought it was going the strip poker route, you know, playing strip poker on the back of the bus.
No, she was just having a ball with us, and she probably was a hooker. And so when we got to wherever we were going, I think we went to Yakima, Washington was our destination. And I remember when she got off, some older man met her, and Bill Blair said, that ain't her dad, I'll bet you. I think you're right, Bill, that ain't her dad. So those are fun days.
She might have been, you know, I don't know how being a hooker back then worked, but maybe she was like 4 different territories.
Man, I don't know either. She might not have been. I might have been just my imagination.
Your Marine years were memorable. When did you leave the Marines?
I got out and I was supposed to get out in November of '57, but Mizzou accepted me, and the Marine Corps let me out in September to go to Mizzou.
So fall of '57, you were.
Fall of '57. Yeah.
So how did you adjust to that life? That must have been quite a shift.
Yeah, that was quite a shock for me. And going to Mizzou, and I took Latin because I wanted to go to journalism school.
Yeah.
I took Latin, and I didn't realize what I was getting into because I had no foreign language at all at Bradleyville. We could barely speak English, you know. And so, but I decided, you know, I thought about this long and hard, and I thought, well, I'm going to pass this damn course. And so I just almost memorized the textbook, and the teacher liked me, and I got, that year, I was recognized as the outstanding student in classical languages at the University of Missouri.
Wow.
And I got the Baird Award, along with Senator Stuart Symington's chief of staff's daughter. She got it in Greek and I got it in Latin.
Wow.
And that kind of gave me confidence. So I can do this, you know. So I worked, I got married. That was not a smart thing to do at that time, but I did. And drove a cab at night and sold pots and pans. And pretty soon I was in the swing of it. So I did well. And University of Missouri, I was doing fine. And journalism school. And then when I was about to graduate, a guy came in to place an ad. He's going to try to hire someone for Johnston's to sell yearbooks.
Oh, so that's how you got into Johnston.
Well, and I was placing the ad for him, and the professor said, "Hey," said, "you ought to talk to him. I mean, he's the best salesman we've got here." And I was selling ads for paper. I was selling pots and pans. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm hiring someone to sell yearbooks." And I said, "How much does it pay?" He said, $150 a week. Really? I mean, that's pretty big money.
Plus a commission, or plus, you know, was it base? Plus
well,
commission?
no, but he took me across the street to the Ever Eat Cafe, and we had a beer and talked about it. And I didn't pursue. I wasn't smart enough at that time to dig into details. But he said it's $150 a week, and what that was a draw. It wasn't even a salary, and it was $150 a week. That was it. And I lived in Columbia. And that was to cover northeast Missouri up to Iowa line, over to Illinois by Quincy.
Right.
You know, I mean, that was a big area to cover.
Right.
And so it was my job to take my new Ford Falcon and drive that area and do it on $150 a week. I had to pay for my gas, pay for my hotels, which were $4 or $5 a night.
Right.
You know, and but every week, Bud Mallett was a banker at Columbia Savings Bank. I'd have to call Bud. He'd say, I know. You're overdrawn, I'm covering you. He said, you'll be in Friday with your check. I'll be in there Friday as soon as my check comes. So I'd run in on Friday, deposit my check. My wife worked at the phone company. She had a job paying $1 an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I started with Johnston's then.
So our listeners may not know that you went on to become the best salesperson for Johnston's?
I started in 1960 and worked northeast Missouri until 65. Then they moved me into St. Louis, which is an untouched territory. We didn't have any business there at all.
Yeah.
And by this time I was rolling. I had learned in Mizzou to sell pots and pans. I've been trained by a really good guy on how to sell exclusive benefits.
How do you sell pots and pans? Is door to door?
Well, first of all, you have to get your own leads. And the prospects were single working girls. You don't want students, they don't have any money. Single working girls.
You don't want housewives? You don't want married?
No housewives. And we didn't do any cooking. So I would go into JCPenney's and find girls working in there. I would talk to them about Hope Chest items. They were receptive, believe it or not, in those days.
Right.
And so I would show them a brochure and make an appointment to go to their house that night with their mother and dad and family. And I'd say, I'll be there at 7 o'clock. And so I'd take a suitcase full of this stuff into the home, had a red carpet, a velvet red carpet I'd spread out. I'd turn the TV off. They taught us all this. You know, you got to take charge.
You got to get their attention.
You sit here and I'll sit here, and I'd go through this. And we had a prospectus like this. And we go through with the young lady, and over this prospectus, it was designed to raise objections to buying and overcome them. And you get the right answer on each page, and when you got through the book, she had agreed pretty well with her parents present that she could afford this, that it's good stuff, that she would want it.
It'd be part of her hope chest.
And it was part of her hope chest, and she got like a 10-piece set of Vitakraft stainless steel cookware.
Was it good cookware?
Oh yes, waterless steel. I've still got some of it now. Very good. Stainless steel waterless cookware, and they had a first call special. If you decide tonight that you want to do this, then I'll give you a 4-place setting of Bavarian fine china. And I showed the translucency of how that works. 4-place set of fine china and all. And so I closed about 80% of the deals.
Wow.
So you got your own leads. You
8
closed
out of 10 times you get.
8 out of 10 times.
You sell something.
Then on Thursday nights, we met at the Daniel Boone Hotel, the old Daniel Boone Hotel in Columbia, with our manager from Kansas City. He'd come down, and we'd sing On Old Vitakraft to the tune of On Wisconsin. And I would wave the money I made this week. I'd do cash the checks and the wave the money, and then I'd hire more people. And then I was making like 40% commission, and I was getting a 15% override on everybody else in the room.
Really?
So that's the way I bought the new Ford Falcon.
So you were. I'm guessing though that any geographic region, there's only so much cookware that you can sell. I mean, wouldn't you sort of work an area and just say, well, the sales are falling off, I got to move to a new area? Or?
It was when I took the job at Johnston's. It was $15,000 a year, as I recall. Does that figure out? No, they told me I could make up to $15,000 a year.
That's good money, man.
And so the George Schlau was owner of Vitakraft in Kansas City. He called me to Kansas City because I told him I was graduating, I was quitting, I was going to go to work for Johnston's. He said, they tell you $15,000 a year. He said, I don't believe that. He said, you're making good money now. You're my manager in Columbia. And he said, we'd like to keep you. And he offered me some more commission or something. I said, no, I've already told him I'd do this. So I went ahead and signed up with Johnston's. And but before we did it, my wife and I they wanted us to come to Owatonna, Minnesota for a final interview with in those days, the CEO would interview you. So we went to Kansas City to catch a train. They bought us a train ticket. And so we got, I did.
So the home office of Johnston's was Owatonna?
Owatonna, yeah. That's where it started.
And
It moved later on to the Twin Cities. But it was Owatonna, yeah.
Wow.
You know about that because it's close to Iowa.
I know, I've been to Owatonna, and it's surprising to me that's the home.
We rode a train that night, and again, almost froze to death on that train from Kansas City to, I guess, went to Rochester.
Yeah.
And I remember where there were bunks, sleeping bunks.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to be on top, my wife's on the bottom, but it was so cold, I crawled down. I was with her. Yeah, we were young. and I remember the conductor came around and feeling around for me, looking for me up there. They collect your tickets. You take off and you collect your tickets. And so he came to collect my ticket. And he said, I said, what the hell are you doing up here? He said, I'm looking for you. I'm looking for your tickets. I said, I'm down here. So I went up there and they hired me, and that was then I became in 1970. I started on 1960. 1966, I acknowledged I had become a serious alcoholic. I went to an AA meeting July 22nd, 1966, and never had another drink. My work with Johnston's was going downhill at that time. I was about to get fired. In 1966, went to AA meeting, never had another drink, and I returned.
You have not had a drink since 1966?
I've not had a drink since then. But I started working between 66 and 70. I became the #1 man in the nation out of 1,000 salesmen, and I was #1 in delivered dollar volume.
Wow.
And commissions, and I stayed that way every year until I retired in 1985.
Wow.
So I worked 25 years and retired at the top of the heap. And then that's when I bought the schools in St. Louis. I bought Sanford Brown College.
Yeah.
I started truck driving school, trained 35,000 CDL drivers in Missouri, Illinois, and Ohio. and had Sanford Brown College in Missouri and Illinois and Kansas City and St. Louis.
Wow.
And then I sold everything and came back to Bradleyville,
Yeah.
where I am.
And you bought, when did you buy this property?
I bought, I built this house.
Yeah, you bought the land?
I bought the land over a period say, from 1988 on, because it just so happened that almost all these farmers around here were getting old and getting ready to sell, and I had some money. So I bought like 25 farms, and they're all contiguous. So I got 3,300 acres here.
Yeah.
And
3,300 acres.
yeah. And the house, this is like 40 acres right here where the house is. And I was in St. Louis still. My brother Joe, who runs a store there, he called me, he said, hey, there's 40 acres that you need to buy. I said, Joe, I don't need any more land. I got all the land I want. He said, no, he kept on. I said, how much is it? He said, it's $16,000. $16,000. So I said, well, why don't you, I said, go ahead and get paperwork done. I'll send you a check. We'll close by mail. So we closed by mail. And so it was 2 or 3 months later, I came down to visit my mother. And Joe, he said, have you seen your land you bought? I said, no, where is it? So we came over here and this is all.
He could have really pulled your leg there. He could have shown you some, some bottom land or something.
We came up here, had to cut a fence to come up here. I had to have a Jeep to get up here.
Yeah.
And I said, man, this would be a good place to build a house. So that was the beginning of it. Yeah. We built the house and
so $16,000 for 40 acres. Am I doing the math right? That's about $300 an acre.
yeah,
Wow.
that was and that made me think, because in those days it was like $100 an acre was a going rate.
Wow.
You know, and
So you paid top dollar. Right?
yeah.
Okay, a couple other questions that I know were very interesting. You've had an interesting life. How'd you get into elk?
I moved back here and started farming on this land, and I bought a bunch of cattle. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Even my elderly mother said, what are you doing? She said, you never did want to get your hands dirty. You never did want to really work. But I had money, so I just bought cattle, and I hired someone. And the guy said, what about working facilities? I said, what's that? He said, well, we've got a bunch of cattle out here, and I got to work these cattle, and we don't have any corrals, or we don't have anything. I said, well, let's get them built. So I didn't know what working facilities were. I didn't know anything. So I bought bulldozers. I cleared about 2,000 acres of land, and I spent a fortune on fences and bulldozers and seeding land and buying cattle and buying tractors and trailers. I was losing my butt. And so the reason I got into elk, I was reading a magazine about people who were raising elk, and they were making money on it. So I called a friend of mine up in North Missouri. I knew he had elk, and he said, oh yeah, you can make money in that. So I started buying elk in 1995 at the peak of the market.
25 years ago.
And that's when, 95, at that time, people were selling the antler velvet. They'd cut the antlers off the bulls in the springtime at a certain point, and they would put them in freezers and freeze them, and then they would sell them to the Asians in the fall. You know, mainly the South Koreans were the main buyers, and they would pay $100 a pound.
What was it? What would they do with it?
They used it for medicine.
Really?
Use it for medicine. They still do. And they would grind it up and put it in capsules.
Antler velvet.
Antler, and it's the antlers, when they grow them every year. And at first, in deer and elk, they're fuzzy, they're velvety.
Right.
And they'll even bleed. When you cut them off, they bleed.
Oh, yeah.
So they take those at a certain point in the velvet stage, and they cut them off, and they freeze them. Then when they take them wherever they go, and they freeze them, and they bake them, and they grind them, and they put them in capsules, and it's serious medicine for them. But we were getting $100 a pound, and you know, a big bull would have like 40 pounds of antler.
Yeah.
So that's $4,000 a year,
Per bull.
and I had about 100 bulls, so we were making money for 2 or 3
So you didn't have
years.
to even kill the animal. You just harvested the.
Yeah, I didn't. I have to hurt you. In fact, we get the bull. I had a special barn built by a New Zealand guy who knew what he was doing. It has cubicles in there with swinging doors and a hydraulic squeeze chute It would squeeze you could get the elk in,
Right.
squeeze them, lift them up off the ground, and then go in there and put lidocaine, just like you're going to the dentist. We
Right.
give them shots of lidocaine so it wouldn't
So
hurt
they don't
them.
feel anything.
Then take a saw and cut them off. Had a big walk-in freezer right there. We'd put them in the freezer, and then in the fall, the buyers would come around with freezer trailers,
Huh.
and they would buy them from you and put them in trailers. But then what into that was the mad cow disease, which in elk and deer is chronic wasting disease.
Yeah.
Well, that, if you recall, they had pictures on TV of a mad cow falling
Right.
down,
Right.
and this terrible disease is, I can't even pronounce the name of it, but it scared everybody, and people stopped. South Korea stopped all products from North America. They put an embargo on all products from North America. So it just killed the market for the antler velvet. So ever since then, we don't even cut the antlers off now. Now I got big bulls, they go into hard antler, then every spring they shed them,
Right.
and they grow another set.
Right.
So,
So are they, you know, they don't generate any income for you, right?
no, right now, I mean, I'm lucky. I did sell, about 2 years ago, I sold five trailer loads of bulls. And they take them up to a Lolly Sale Barn in Macon, Missouri. You probably know where that is, because
I do.
up 63 goes right through Macon.
Yeah.
Macon Lolly's had a big exotic sale barn. They sell everything from elk to lions and tigers and giraffes. And I sold, they had a big special elk sale, and all the buyers from the west, those hunting preserves, would come in and buy the bulls and take them out there and remove the ear tags and have the city boys go out and shoot them. Yeah, think they're hunting.
Yeah.
And so Dot hated that. She said, I hate to do that. She said, those are beautiful animals. And
But they're gonna pass on anyway.
yeah, I said, hey.
What's the lifespan about?
They're about like cattle, 15, 20 years.
15 to 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So a natural life cycle is about 20 years tops.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
elk.
yeah.
So now, how big of a herd do you have now?
I have about 35 or 40. I had 300 at one time.
Really?
But I got about, we had new babies this spring. I think we've got around 40 now.
Yeah.
And I've got 2 herds of cows that we breed every year.
Beef
And this
cattle?
is the time right now.
Yeah.
I've got a big bull with each of them. You can't put 2 bulls in one pasture because they'll fight till one of them is dead.
Yeah.
So I got big bulls with each of them, and they will breed the cows this fall. Then next June we'll have the babies.
Babies.
Yeah,
And those are beef cattle, basically.
those are, we can now sell them for food. Some people buy them to eat. Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, not cattle. They're elk.
Oh, the elk.
Yeah, I'm talking about, when I say
Oh.
bulls and cows, I'm talking about
Okay,
elk.
so you don't have any beef cows?
Well, I had a bunch of cows. I've got a bunch of beef cattle, but I sold all of my beef cattle. I had a bunch of guys working for me. And I had 1,500 head of cattle, and I was losing my butt on those cattle. And one day, one of the guys came into my office and said, "Me and the boys are going to quit if we don't get a raise." I said, "Shorty, your time is perfect because you're all fired as of right now."
Close it down.
And he said, "Well, I didn't mean to do that." I said, "Well, no, I was going to do this anyhow." So I called Randy Hoover at the West Plains Sale Barn.
Yeah.
And I said, "I've got a whole herd of cattle to sell." So he came over here and said, "Hey, we'll have a special sale for you." So we had a special sale, sold all my cattle, and now I'll lease the ground out to a guy from Arkansas who is a real cattle man.
Mhm.
He knows how to raise cattle and make money.
Yeah.
So I don't worry about it now.
You are more of a hobbyist.
Yeah.
Of the cattle. Okay, I think I can promise this will be my last question.
Okay.
Bertie Manning. So when you were acquiring your land here, at one point you bought the land that Bertie was living on at the time, right? So my sense of it is the Manning family came from Nebraska, I think.
North Platte, Nebraska.
North Platte, Nebraska. Don't know exactly when, early 20th century. And it was a whole family.
Yep.
And as the years passed, 2 things happened. Well, one didn't happen. They never, what I would say, modernized. So in the 20th century, you saw rural electricity come in, you saw things that phone service, things that we think of as like, well, that's just part of being alive, is you're gonna have electricity and you're gonna have, a refrigerator and you're gonna have a washing machine and you're gonna have a television. And so when the pot and pan salesman comes in, he can turn it off and make the sale.
Yeah.
They never modernized. So it wasn't like they were back to the landers. They were a family that just never modernized. Okay? And then my understanding is all the family died off except Bertie. So
Yep.
she was, she'd gone to SMS. I don't know if she got a degree or not, but she was not an ignorant young woman.
She's very, very intelligent.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
she just, that was her life, was
Yeah.
living a sort of a pre-modern life in eastern Taney County.
They came from North Platte in a covered wagon, and you got pictures of it in your museum,
Right,
in your Ozarks studies.
right.
And her father drew pictures of the covered wagon and oxen. They actually were pulled oxen.
Yeah,
And so they came and they stopped at Chadwick and they worked in a canning factory. I think a tomato canning factory for a
Really?
while.
really. And
Then they found this land that right here. I think, I don't know, they started maybe with 160 acres. And in those days, sometimes you could buy land for $1 an acre. I mean, it was real cheap.
Right,
So they came down here, and you're right, they never modernized. They built an old cabin. They lived in a lean-to. There wasn't even a house the first year or two. And the father had a big club foot. I guess maybe he had polio or something, but his one foot was about this much shorter than the other. So in those days, they'd make a sole of the shoe about this thick.
Yeah.
And so it was father and mother, and she had a brother, and she had a sister.
Right.
And they all came down here.
So a family of 5.
Yeah. And I think her father may have been the first one to pass away. Then her brother was a preacher. Her brother, and Bertie told me that they lived over here in the hollow, and he was preaching over Hercules or somewhere, and he walked home in the rain, which in those days, walking home was expected. Everybody did that.
Right.
But she said he got real sick and died. Then she had another little brother. His name was Haley. And he was named after Haley's Comet. He was born in 1911, and his father painted a picture of Haley's Comet. You've got those pictures there too.
Right.
And he named him Haley.
Yeah.
And Haley loved black walnuts, and they lived this. And so Bertie said one day he had to go a long ways, like half a mile to get the first walnut tree. So he brought a walnut up there and yard. He put his heel on. He said, "Oh, someday I'll have my own walnut." And she said, "This big walnut tree, that's the one he planted."
Yeah.
But he was born in 1911 on Haley's Comet, and he died in 1917 in a flu epidemic.
Yeah.
That's when the flu epidemic hit 17 and 18. The flu, that's the same thing we're going through right now.
Right.
And so she said there were 2 brothers. I forgot the name of the
So
other.
he only lived to be 8 or so.
Yeah, I think he was like 7 years old. Yeah,
6 or 7.
yeah. And they lived there. And then so her mother died. I remember her mother walked. Even when I was a kid, her mother walked like this. She had a cane and she could look up.
Yeah.
And her mother passed away, and then Eleanor passed away. And she and Eleanor were very close.
Yeah.
Eleanor was more of she was more adventurous. She would go out west and work and bring back money and tell Bertie stories. And so Eleanor finally passed away.
So Bertie pretty much stuck close to home.
Bertie stayed there, and Bertie told me, she said, "I came home that summer day from my sister's funeral." She said, "Now I'm here by myself. Everybody's gone." And she said, "I started to cry." Then Bertie was a very religious woman. She said, "I started to cry. Then I felt someone's arms just wrap around me. And it was Jesus." And she said, "He told me not to worry." And she said, "I've never been lonely since then. I've never been lonely a day." And she
How
never
long
had,
did she live by herself? Do you know?
she lived there for many years. 1999, she did finally assent to a party line telephone.
Yes, yes.
She had a party line
That
telephone.
was her compromise with
Yeah.
modernity was.
And she had fallen on the ice in the wintertime in 1999. So Eric and I went over there in a four-wheel drive truck to get her.
So you already acquired the land that she was.
No, actually I didn't. She sold the land to some other people
Oh.
who were her good friends, and I bought it from them after she passed away.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So I misunderstood. I thought that you'd acquired it and you just gave her, what do you call that, a life residency on the.
No, somebody else bought it from her, and
She
in
died, she passed and they sold it.
Yeah.
And you bought it. Okay.
yeah,
But the house was still, the cabin was still
yeah,
there.
the house is still there, and that's when Dave Richards came down
I've heard this story.
with Peter Hershen,
Yeah.
and he's the one who crawled up in the attic, and he found an SMS material, Bertle's workbooks from the 30s, where she had
Yeah.
gone to school there.
Yeah, he found other things too. One time he said he was up there in the attic and he was going through papers and whatnot. Because Bertle evidently would, any paper or magazine that came in, she'd just throw it up there for insulation.
Yeah,
Throw it up there. The other story I've heard that is oft repeated is she also kept a pair of hand shears near her bed so that if a snake stuck its head up through the slats of the floor, she'd just reach over and
she told me that. She told me
snip
that
its head off.
I said, "What's this for here?" She said, "These cracks in the floor." She said, "These snakes there on it. I chopped your heads off." So that's good. Funny part, Bertle, was that when the USA Today reporter came here to do a story, and we decided to go there at night. I planned it that intentionally, and I talked to Bertle. I said, "Okay, he's going to get here late. It's going to be after dark. Is it okay if I bring him over?" She said, "Okay." So we had this old truck and going through, and first of all, the tree was across the road because the road was hardly ever traveled. So I said, "Bill, you got to help me move this big limb." So we got out, and there was a rustling. First of all, he said, "Are there any wild animals around here?" I said, "Well, yeah, there are a few, but not much."
Just
So we were moving out.
bears and painters.
There was a rustling of leaves. He said, "Oh my God, it was our dog was following us, run through the." So he was already unnerved. So we go down, and we get in the side of her house. We got to go through have to cross a little branch, and looking
Right.
through the weeds, we could see she had a kerosene lamp.
Mhm.
She didn't have electricity, kerosene lamp. And you could see a silhouette against the window. She wore this headscarf all the time.
Yeah.
You can see that it's like an Alfred Hitchcock movie. You can see that silhouette there. And he said, "Do you think it's okay to go up?" I said, "Yeah, let's go." So I went up there, and she was very hard of hearing. So I knocked on the door, and she didn't hear me. So I just started banging on the door. And he said, "My God," it scared him for me to bang on. So finally she comes to the door, opens the door, and brings us in.
Good.
And he stayed here 3 or 4 days. I gave him the old truck to use. He became good friends of hers. He got her in, took her for drives, and she told him stories. And then he came out with you've seen that story,
Yeah.
front page of USA Today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was about what, 1999, 2000?
I think it was 96.
96.
No, it must have been 96, yeah, because she was still alive. My wife
Oh,
and I
so
was,
she passed, it was 99 when you were cleaning out.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
My wife and I were in San Francisco, and Bill Varner called me, and he said, "Be sure and get the USA Today tomorrow." And so I went out, and it was sure enough there, and a great big color picture on page 1. I think somebody in Springfield, I think maybe Bob Linder took the picture.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Bob did that?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think maybe he did because.
Good for him.
But anyhow, it was she was quite a character. Bertle was. She was
And then
my.
the house was dismantled and reassembled over at Silver Dollars.
It's at Silver Dollar City now.
Still there.
Peter Hershen came over and took it apart. I gave it to him, and they reassembled it over there, along with copies of all the newspaper articles and photographs and
Yeah.
paintings that her father had done. He got copies of those on the wall.
So her father was an artist.
Yeah.
The whole family was kind of artistic, weren't they?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what made them the way they were. They were not compliant, like you say. They weren't.
Right.
They didn't. they didn't march to the drummer, you know, I mean, they
Right.
had their own way of living and they were
Strong
happy with it.
faith, and they just didn't, they almost like
Yeah.
didn't believe in modern life.
Yeah,
Uh,
I asked Bertie, I said, what do you have for breakfast? She said, I have sausage and fruit. I said, well, you don't have a refrigerator, you know? She said, so I got a cellar.
yeah.
So she'd canned sausage, and she'd canned peaches and apples and things, and she had a wood burning stove. She'd go out and chop wood herself and start the fire.
There was a spring. We've been out there. We went
Yeah.
out there one day.
Had a big pump, you know, a well pump. That was her bit.
A little bit of a system, you know, what I call a system.
Yes.
I mean, there was kind of a thing
Yeah.
there. And what else do you need?
And she had all kinds of beautiful flowers. My mother used to have to go there because they had come from Germany. The man in the family apparently come from Germany, and they had all kinds of exotic plants in her yard. And a lot of people used to go there and pull them up and take them and try to start them. I don't know, but I didn't know anything about that. But Bertie was quite a lady.
Yeah.
She was my Sunday school teacher when I was a little kid.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for sharing your just a few of your life stories with us.
Thank you, Tom. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks.